the girl in red sneakers. It was a warm Saturday morning in Portland, Oregon, when the local martial arts center opened its doors for the annual Masters and Kids demonstration. Families filled the stands, excited to watch seasoned black belts show off their moves and, later, playfully spar with the younger students. Among the children was Sophie Caldwell, a 9-year-old girl with curly brown hair and a spark in her eye. She wore bright red sneakers and a worn-out white belt. Her first month into karate. Her mother, Laura, sat nervously in the front row, clutching a cup of coffee and silently praying her daughter wouldn't trip on the mat. At the front of the dojo stood Sensei Kyle Jennings, a tall, cocky black belt in his 30s who had just returned from a regional tournament win. Kyle was known for being flashy, sometimes arrogant. When the host announced a fun sparring moment between a master and a student, Kyle smirked and raised his hand. "I'll fight the red sneakers," he said jokingly, pointing at Sophie. The crowd chuckled. Sophie looked unsure, but Sensei Mark, the dojo's kind-hearted head instructor, gave her a reassuring nod. She stepped forward. "Just have fun," he whispered to her. Kyle, still smirking, leaned down. "Don't cry when I fake a punch, all right?" The crowd laughed again. But what happened next silenced the room. Part 2. The unexpected strike. The match began. Kyle bounced lightly on his heels, exaggeratedly pretending to warm up. Sophie took a standard beginner stance, just like she had practiced during her 4 training sessions. Then, out of nowhere, Sophie launched a perfectly timed front kick. Not hard, not harmful, but precisely aimed at Kyle's shoulder. Kyle stumbled back. Gasps filled the air. "She's not supposed to know that," one of the instructors murmured. Kyle chuckled, now mildly annoyed. "All right, lucky shot." But then Sophie moved again, this time combining a sidestep, a hand block, and a feint jab. It was clear she wasn't guessing. She knew technique. By the third move, Kyle stopped joking. His expression turned serious. He tried to fake her out with a quick leg sweep, but Sophie anticipated it and countered with a clean rollback and kick combo, something taught at intermediate level. Now the audience stood up. "Who trained her?" someone whispered. A medal buried in the closet. After the match ended, with Sophie earning a respectful bow from Kyle, the dojo was buzzing. Turns out, Sophie's grandfather was Lieutenant Commander Harold Caldwell, a retired U.S. Navy combat instructor and 6th-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu. He had passed away 2 years ago, but before that he spent every weekend teaching Sophie games that were, in reality, military-grade defense drills, disguised as fun. Laura, Sophie's mom, had never told the dojo. She thought her daughter just liked the stories Grandpa used to tell. When reporters showed up that evening, after the video went viral online, Sophie simply said, "I just did what Grandpa taught me." Kyle's redemption and Sophie's new belt. Kyle Jennings later posted an apology video. "I underestimated her. I was wrong. She's more disciplined than most adults I've trained with." A week later, at a special ceremony, Sophie was awarded an honorary yellow belt, skipping the usual time requirement. But more importantly, the dojo created a new class in her name, Caldwell Combos, Legacy for Kids. And every Saturday, kids from all over Portland came to train under Sophie's playful yet precise style, carrying on the legacy of a little girl in red sneakers who shocked the world just by being herself. The viral storm and a call from Washington. By Monday morning, the video of Sophie's match had reached over 12 million views on YouTube. News anchors were calling her the Red Sneaker Wonder. TikTok was flooded with clips analyzing her moves, and even retired martial arts experts were reacting in awe. But the biggest surprise came when Laura's phone rang at 6:42 a.m. "Is this Mrs. Caldwell?" "This is Captain Eleanor Briggs from the Department of Defense. We'd like to speak with you about your daughter." Laura froze. That afternoon, 2 officials flew in from Washington, D.C., and met with the family at the dojo. They explained that Sophie had demonstrated tactical instincts and muscle memory far beyond her age. It was clear she wasn't trained like an average student. Captain Briggs slid a file across the table. Inside was a photograph from Afghanistan, 2008, a young Lieutenant Commander Harold Caldwell, her father, holding a training session with elite Marines. Written underneath in faded pen, Train them like they're your own children. They'll protect like family." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes. One of the officials said softly, "We believe your father passed on something extraordinary, and your daughter is living proof of it." A surprise guest and a challenge. That weekend, during the dojo's follow-up event, hundreds of families showed up, eager to see Sophie. The gym had never been so packed. Just as Sophie was preparing to demonstrate her techniques with Sensei Mark, someone called out, "Wait!" Everyone turned. Walking in through the gym doors was Master Takashi Watanabe, an 8th-degree black belt from Japan, known globally as one of the last living martial artists to train under the old samurai lineage. "I came to meet the girl who made America believe again," he said in a calm voice. "Let's see what she's made of." The crowd fell into stunned silence. Sophie looked at her mom. Laura smiled. "Go on, baby." With every step onto the mat, Sophie's heartbeat thundered in her ears, but she remembered her grandpa's words. "Be still like the wind. Let them move first." What followed wasn't a fight. It was a graceful dance of respect. Master Watanabe tested her with light strikes, balance shifts, and spiritual focus exercises. Sophie passed everyone. At the end, the master bowed deeply to her. "You're not just a student," he said. "You're a keeper of something ancient." To be continued. The hidden room in Grandpa's house. That night, after the match with Master Watanabe, Sophie and her mom drove quietly back home. The stars were glowing above Portland, and the air felt electric. Laura was proud, but also overwhelmed. Her daughter had just stood face to face with a world-renowned master and earned his respect. Back at home, Laura tucked Sophie into bed, but Sophie couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her grandfather. "Mom," she whispered through the darkness, "did Grandpa ever leave me anything?" Laura paused. "He said once, if anything ever happened to him, to check the attic." "Can we look?" Sophie asked. "It's past midnight. Please." They climbed up the creaky ladder into the attic. Dust floated in the beam of a small flashlight. Boxes were stacked neatly, labeled with decades. 70s, 80s, Navy files, gear. And then Sophie spotted something. A small wooden chest tucked behind a stack of winter blankets. On top of it was a folded American flag and an old brass key tied with red string. Laura knelt beside her daughter. "I've never seen this." Inside the chest was a leather-bound journal, several black and white photographs of Grandpa training with elite soldiers, and at the very bottom, a metal nameplate etched with a strange symbol. A sword, a forgotten alchemy mark, and an anchor. Sophie looked confused. "What's that?" Laura didn't know. But taped to the back of the plate was a handwritten note. "To my granddaughter. If you're reading this, I knew you'd be the one. Follow the anchor. It begins in D.C., ends in Kyoto. And remember, strength is silent until it's needed." The letter that changed everything. The next morning, while Laura was at work, Sophie brought the journal to the dojo. Sensei Mark recognized the alchemy mark immediately. "That's not just decoration," he said. "It's the old emblem of a decommissioned U.S. Navy Special Division. Your grandfather wasn't just a combat instructor. He was part of Project Whisperblade." Sophie blinked. "What's that?" Mark hesitated. "A secret program. Mixed martial arts, ancient Eastern tactics, mind-body warfare. It was shut down after a mission in Japan went wrong. Most of it was classified. The journal had pages marked in both English and Japanese. Inside were detailed movements, fluid, unfamiliar, and pages on breathing through fear, hearing danger, moving without being seen. One page was labeled, "The 3 unseen strikes. Do not attempt before age 13. But Sophie wasn't reading anymore. Her eyes had landed on a photo taped inside the back cover. Her grandfather, standing with 3 other agents, and behind them, a mural with the exact same sword anchor alchemy symbol, painted on a crumbling brick wall. Below it, handwritten in red ink, "They've buried the legacy, but she will bring it back. Journey to the Forgotten Temple." 3 weeks later, Sophie and her mother stood at the gates of an old temple on the outskirts of Kyoto, Japan. The air smelled of pine and old stone. Everything was quiet, as if the trees themselves were waiting. They had followed every clue in Harold Caldwell's journal. from hidden coordinates written in the margin to an old Navy contact in Washington who arranged their travel. At the center of the temple grounds was a cracked stone path leading to a door without a handle. Carved above it was a faded image of a girl kneeling beside a warrior, both facing a rising sun. Sophie stepped forward. Nothing moved. She remembered her grandfather's words, "Strength is silent until it's needed." She closed her eyes and bowed slowly, palms flat together in front of her chest, just like she practiced with Sensei Mark. A low grinding sound echoed from beneath her feet. The stone door shifted and opened inward with a deep breath of wind. Inside, the walls were lined with scrolls, weapons, and old naval uniforms from multiple countries, symbols of peace through balance. In the center of the room was a circular platform with pressure plates and 3 folded letters, each addressed to the future, to the daughter of honor, to the one who waited. Sophie picked up the second letter. The paper was old, but the handwriting was familiar, bold and steady. It spoke of balance between power and restraint, about how true fighters don't seek war, but carry the skill to stop one. It ended with a single instruction. When the moon casts no shadow, climb to the highest point. Your true test will begin. Sophie looked up. A circular opening in the temple ceiling showed a piece of blue sky above the mountains. Her journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. No shadow on the mountain. 2 nights later, on the eve of the new moon, Sophie stood at the highest peak behind the Kyoto temple. The sky was dark. No stars. No moon. Just wind brushing through the trees and the distant sound of temple chimes. Laura waited below with one of the monks who'd silently guided them. He had told her earlier that no one but the chosen one could climb to the summit tonight. The last person who tried, decades ago, returned without a voice, silent from fear or awe. No one knew. Sophie stepped onto a stone circle at the mountaintop. Her breath fogged lightly in the cold air. Nothing happened. Then, faint footsteps. She turned quickly. A figure in gray robes stood 10 feet away, face half hidden beneath a hood. The figure bowed slowly, then removed the hood. It was a woman, maybe in her late 60s, with striking gray eyes and the stance of a warrior. "You're Caldwell's blood," she said. "He saved my life and soul. He taught you well, but are you ready for what comes next?" Sophie didn't speak. She simply took the position her grandfather had shown her, knees bent, arms forward, eyes focused. The woman smiled. Without warning, she lunged. They moved like shadows, silent, fast. The woman threw palm strikes and sweeps, testing Sophie's reaction. Sophie countered with precise footwork, redirecting energy rather than meeting it with force. It lasted 7 minutes. At the end, the woman stepped back, breathing hard but smiling. "You listen to the air. You follow its rhythm. That is rare." She handed Sophie a small wooden box. Inside was a folded cloth with symbols stitched in gold, and beneath it a stone pendant, cool to the touch and shaped like a teardrop. "This is your invitation. You've been seen." "By who?" Sophie asked, but the woman was already walking away, her silhouette disappearing into the wind. Sophie looked out across the dark forest below. She didn't know exactly what was coming next, but for the first time in her life, she felt completely ready. The whisper from the pendant. The next morning, Sophie sat alone in the temple garden, the stone pendant resting in her palm. It looked simple, grayish-white, smooth, and perfectly shaped. But when she pressed her fingers along the edge, she felt something inside, like a pulse, a vibration too soft for the ears but clear to the bones. She held it close to her ear out of curiosity. And then she heard it. Not a voice, not words, but something deeper. It was like a memory, not her own, rising inside her. Flashes of her grandfather training in a rain-soaked jungle, speaking Japanese to a man in a blindfold, handing over the same pendant to a council of elders. She dropped it in surprise. Laura, who had just stepped into the garden, rushed over. "Sophie, are you okay?" Sophie blinked hard. "I saw things. Like dreams. But real." Laura picked up the pendant and stared at it. "Is this what she gave you last night?" Sophie nodded slowly. "She said it was an invitation. But I think it's also a key." Later that day, the monks led them to a small shrine behind the temple. Unlike the others, this one was sealed shut with smooth, polished walls. No doors, no seams, just a narrow indentation, exactly the shape of the pendant. Sophie stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, but her heart felt steady. She slid the pendant into the groove. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint chime echoed through the trees, and a section of the wall shimmered, like water rippling through stone. It vanished. Behind it was a spiral staircase, descending deep underground. At the top of the stairs was a message, freshly carved. She passed the summit. Let her descend. Sophie turned to her mom. You don't have to come. Laura shook her head. I wouldn't let you go alone. Together, they stepped into the shadows. The path below smelled like old cedar and stone. Torches lit as they walked, one by one, revealing a long corridor lined with carvings, of children training alongside warriors, of maps drawn from memory, of the past waiting to meet the future. They didn't know it yet, but they were walking into a place no outsider had entered for 54 years, a sanctuary of forgotten fighters and the last chapter of Harold Caldwell's legacy. And at the end of that corridor, someone was waiting. The man in the chair. The hallway curved deeper underground, the air becoming colder with every step. The carvings grew more detailed, some showing combat techniques that hadn't been taught in centuries. Others depicted symbols Sophie had only seen in her grandfather's journal. After what felt like 20 minutes, they reached a massive wooden door. No lock, no handle, just silence that had opened by itself. Inside was a circular chamber with walls of stone and sanded wood. Flickering lanterns cast long shadows across the floor. In the center of the room sat a single man in a wooden chair, dressed in a dark robe. He was old, very old. His hands were covered in scars, and a long, thin scar ran from his right cheek to his neck. His eyes were closed, but Sophie could feel his awareness, like he had known they were coming long before they arrived. Step forward, he said without opening his eyes. Sophie did. You carry the weight of your bloodline, he continued. Do you know why you're here? I want to understand my grandfather, Sophie said. And I want to know what this place is. The man opened his eyes. They were pale gray, almost silver. This is where warriors who cannot be found come to rest. This is the vault of quiet hands, the last sanctuary of those who fight not for medals, but for meaning. Laura stepped in beside Sophie, but the man raised a hand gently. She must go alone from here. Sophie looked up at her mom. Laura knelt and kissed her forehead. I trust you. The old man slowly stood. Your grandfather was the last American invited here. He brought peace during a time of hidden war. He saved 3 of our youngest. He never asked for credit. He turned and walked toward a wall covered in vertical wooden planks. At its center, he pressed his palm into a faded handprint. A small hatch opened. Inside was a scroll tied with twine and an old photograph of Harold Caldwell standing between 2 monks. Behind them was a younger version of the same man, seated in the same chair. He handed the scroll to Sophie. This is your trial. If you pass, your name will be carved beside his. Sophie held the scroll tightly. What's the trial? She asked. The man smiled. Understanding yourself in silence. Moving where no one watches. Defending without anger. You will not strike, unless it's to protect, and you will not speak, unless it's to teach. He bowed, and then the floor beneath Sophie shifted. A panel lowered gently, carrying her downward into a new chamber, lit only by natural light coming from somewhere far above. She was alone now, and her trial had begun, the trial of stillness. The room Sophie descended into was circular and cold, its floor covered in fine white sand. There were no weapons, no doors, just a single mat in the center and a tiny fountain trickling water into a stone basin. The sound of water echoed gently off the walls. She stood quietly, unsure of what to do. But then she remembered the scroll. She untied the twine and slowly unrolled the parchment. Inside were only 3 sentences written in delicate black ink. Sit until your mind stops running. Move when your body forgets fear. And when the light disappears, let your breath become the answer. Sophie sat cross-legged on the mat. She closed her eyes. Her heart was loud. Her mind was louder. Thoughts swirled. What if I fail? What if they made a mistake choosing me? Why did Grandpa bring me into all of this? Why me? She tried to breathe slowly, just like Sensei Mark had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Minutes passed, then maybe an hour. The wind above shifted. The light from the ceiling dimmed. Shadows began to stretch across the room. Her legs started to cramp. Her shoulders twitched. But she stayed still, until, slowly, the questions in her head faded. She stopped wondering what time it was. She stopped comparing herself to warriors or to her grandfather. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She just breathed, and then, total darkness. The last sliver of light vanished. It was like the world folded in. Her eyes blinked open, but she couldn't see anything. Not her hands, not the mat, not even the faintest shape of the fountain. She wanted to panic but didn't. Instead, she listened. The fountain, the sand, her heartbeat, her breath. Then, somewhere across the room, a whisper. Not in words, just presence. She stood, slowly, letting instinct guide her. She stepped through the sand with bare feet, carefully, silently, as if each movement told her a secret. She turned left, then paused. Something was watching. But instead of running, she knelt down, placed her palm against the cold floor, and whispered, "I'm not here to fight. I am here to listen." The room lit up in an instant, not by flame, but by soft white light rising from the walls. In front of her stood a woman in all white, silent, with eyes that looked centuries old. She nodded once, and vanished. A voice filled the room, not from a person, but from the space itself. The first trial is complete. She knows quiet. She may continue. Then a hidden door opened behind her, and Sophie, calm, changed, stepped through it, not as a student anymore, but as someone chosen. The path of shadows. The door led to a long, narrow tunnel carved directly into the stone. The air was warmer here, and it smelled faintly of incense and pine. Torches along the walls lit one by one as Sophie passed, revealing old symbols. Some she recognized from her grandfather's journal, others she couldn't even describe. At the end of the tunnel was another door, smaller, made of blackened wood with scratches along its edge. It opened with a soft creak, and she stepped into a room unlike any she had ever seen. It was vast, circular again, but this one had platforms hanging in midair, stone walkways suspended over a deep, misty drop. They connected like puzzle pieces, but some were broken, others moved slowly in random directions. On the walls around her, shadows flickered and shifted, even though there were no flames nearby. A voice, calm, low, spoke from somewhere above. "You have mastered stillness. Now, can you move without being seen?" At first, Sophie didn't understand, but then she saw it. Across the platforms, near the center of the chamber, was a small pedestal. On it sat a folded cloth. She knew instinctively that was the next piece. She stepped forward. The moment her foot touched the first platform, one of the shadows detached from the wall and formed a shape, tall, thin, like a ghost in armor. It turned toward her. Sophie's breath froze. The shadow moved slowly, scanning. She stepped back. Nothing happened. She watched carefully. When the shadow turned its head, its eyes, if it had any, faced forward for only 2 seconds before scanning again. A pattern. She waited, listened. Then she moved one fast step to the side. The platform beneath her creaked. The shadow twitched. She dropped flat to the stone, heart pounding. The shadow hovered, then turned away. She exhaled. This was the trial. Movement through silence, through awareness. She didn't run. She flowed, waiting, sliding, crawling, and rolling only when the shadows weren't looking. It took almost an hour, but step by step, she made it across the shifting stone bridges. Finally, she reached the pedestal. She gently lifted the folded cloth. Inside was a symbol stitched in gold, the same one from the pendant. Beneath it was another small scroll. It read, "You're now seen by the watchers. Next you must speak, without voice. Go where the echoes begin." As she stood to turn back, she noticed something behind the pedestal. Another door camouflaged into the wall. It opened at her touch. Inside, a spiral staircase led downward again. But before she descended, she looked back once more at the stone paths, the shadows, and the silence. She hadn't defeated anything. She hadn't attacked. She had simply understood. And now, she was ready for the next lesson. The Chamber of Echoes. Sophie descended slowly down the spiral staircase. The air grew warmer, the scent of cedar and ancient parchment filling her lungs. At the bottom was a wooden platform leading into a wide chamber unlike any she'd seen before. There were no walls, at least none she could see. The space seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, yet it didn't feel empty. Instead, it felt alive, as if the room was watching her. A faint hum vibrated in the air, low and steady. In front of her stood 3 stone pillars, each with an object resting at the top. A bell, a book, a blindfold. As she stepped forward, a whisper moved through the air, not from one place, but from everywhere at once. You have been silent. You have been unseen. Now you must speak, without your voice. Sophie looked at the bell. She understood the temptation. Ring it, call attention, break the silence. But something inside told her that was not the answer. She turned to the book. It was old, leather-bound, but when she opened it, the pages were blank. Then she picked up the blindfold. The moment she touched it, the chamber shifted. The humming stopped. Then the voice returned, calm, testing. Can you tell a truth without a word? Can you be heard without being loud? Can you lead without leading? Sophie took a breath. She closed the book, set down the bell, and tied the blindfold over her eyes. Darkness. Silence. She waited. Then, one by one, soft lights flickered to life in the room. She couldn't see them, but she could feel warmth on her face, shifting air, the presence of something or someone nearby. And then, footsteps. Not hers. 6 of them. She could sense people gathering in the space with her. She didn't know who they were, but she knew they were watching. Waiting. She bowed. And then, with blindfold still on, Sophie began to move. She stepped carefully, arms extended slightly, not to defend, but to invite. Each movement was slow, intentional, and graceful. It wasn't a fight stance. It was a message, an echo of discipline, respect, strength, and peace. She turned, bowed again, and stood tall. The room remained silent. But something shifted. A single hand touched her shoulder. A quiet, firm gesture. Then a new voice, soft and close, spoke behind her ear. You have spoken. The blindfold was removed. Before her stood 6 silent elders, each in dark robes, each nodding slowly. You have passed the 3rd trial, the first elder said. And now the choice. Sophie tilted her head. You may return to the surface, known to the world as the girl who carried her grandfather's legacy, or remain here and build a new legacy of your own. Sophie looked down at her small hands, then up at the circle of strangers who somehow felt like family. She didn't answer right away, but in her heart, she already knew. The question was never if she belonged. It was whether the world was ready for her to begin. A legacy reborn. Sophie stood in the center of the circle, the echo of the elders' offer still hanging in the air. Her breath was steady. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, not intimidating, but warm. She was no longer the curious child from Portland. She was something more. She looked around at the 6 elders. Each had passed through their own trials once. Now, they waited for her decision, not with pressure, but with patience. I want to learn more, Sophie said quietly. Not to be a fighter, but to teach. Like he did. The oldest among them, a woman with silver braids and eyes like frost, stepped forward. That is the right answer, she said. And the rarest one. From the far end of the chamber, a door opened, carved not from wood or stone but light, a perfect arc that shimmered like water. The elders stepped aside, allowing Sophie to walk through. Inside, the room was lined with objects from every generation of guardians, staffs and scrolls, maps and masks, photographs of those who had come before her, including one of Harold Caldwell as a younger man, smiling, holding a little girl in a red scarf, Sophie as a toddler. Laura had brought her to meet him that day. She barely remembered it, but he had known. At the far end of the room was a pedestal with a leather box. Inside was a garment unlike anything she'd ever worn. A robe stitched in shades of deep forest green, gold-threaded symbols across the back. Not a uniform of war, but one of wisdom. She put it on. It fit perfectly. Then came a voice, softer than the rest, almost like it came from inside her own chest. Welcome, Keeper the Third Circle. You're now one of us. Back on the surface, Laura waited under a tree near the temple. The monks had said nothing. Hours had passed. Then, from the trail below, came footsteps. Sophie emerged, not in her travel clothes, not in the red sneakers, but in the green and gold robe. Her eyes were calm, her stance different, her energy full. Laura stood and stared, her hands trembling. You're taller, she whispered. Sophie smiled. Maybe, or maybe just straighter. They hugged tightly. As they walked back through the temple gates, Sophie noticed something. Carved on a new panel near the entrance, still faint with fresh etching, was her name. Not just hers. It read, Sophie Caldwell, teacher in silence, student of legacy. And just below it, in smaller letters, red sneakers, green heart, open future. She hadn't just followed in her grandfather's footsteps. Return to noise. 1 month later, Sophie stepped off the plane at Portland International Airport. The air felt heavier than she remembered. Not because of weather, but because the silence she had grown into was gone, replaced by something else. Noise. Reporters waited behind the terminal gates. Flashbulbs sparked. Microphones stretched out like vines. Is it true you trained in a hidden temple in Japan? What's next for the red sneaker girl? Do you plan to compete in international martial art competitions? Can we speak to your mother? Laura wrapped her arm protectively around Sophie's shoulders, but Sophie remained calm. She bowed politely. No interviews today, she said quietly. Thank you for waiting. The cameras kept rolling anyway. Back home, their mailbox overflowed with letters. Dozens of invitations sat in unopened envelopes. TV interviews, national tournaments, sponsorships, a scholarship offer from a private military academy, an email from a Hollywood producer asking for her life rights. But Sophie didn't open any of them. Instead, she went to the dojo. Sensei Mark had redecorated the main wall. At the center, a large framed photo of Harold Caldwell in uniform, flanked by 2 smaller ones. One of Sophie bowing during her trial, the other a candid moment from the Kyoto Temple Garden. When Sophie entered, the students stopped mid-drill. For a moment, no one moved. Then a young boy stepped forward, barely 6 years old, missing a front tooth. Are you going to fight with the cool moves now? He asked. Sophie knelt down to his height. No, I'm going to teach you how not to fight. The kids laughed. Sensei Mark wiped his eyes behind his clipboard. That evening, Sophie sat alone in her room. She opened her grandfather's journal once more. This time, she wasn't searching for answers. She was writing. She added her first entry at the back. I don't want to be famous. I want to be useful. I want to train kids to be steady in chaos, still in noise, calm in anger. I want them to stand before the world and not flinch. Just like I learned to. Grandpa, I hope I'm doing it right. As she finished writing, a knock came at the door. It was Laura, holding her phone. You might want to see this. She handed it over. On the screen was a video, uploaded just an hour ago. It was the woman in white from Sophie's second trial, standing at a temple altar. Behind her, a gathering of students and a symbol Sophie hadn't seen since the underground hall, the third circle. The caption read, "The keeper has returned. The circle is open again." Sophie smiled. The world was watching her now, but she didn't mind. Because for the first time, she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was ready to build. The circle expands. 3 weeks passed quietly in Portland. Sophie returned to training at the dojo, but not as a student. Sensei Mark had given her a title, young instructor of legacy classes. She taught twice a week, mostly to children under 12. They adored her. She taught not just moves, but meanings. One day, after class, a girl named Naomi pulled Sophie aside. My brother gets mad all the time, she whispered. He hits stuff. Sometimes he hits me. Can I show him the quiet thing you do? Sophie didn't flinch. She knelt beside Naomi and placed a hand over the girl's own. Let's teach him how to breathe before he breaks, she said. Word spread quickly through the community. Parents began signing up their children, not because they wanted them to fight, but because they saw something different in Sophie's classes. She didn't praise power. She didn't shout instructions. She taught them how to be still, how to observe, how to respond with control. Even a local police chief visited after his daughter joined. After watching one class, he approached Sophie and said, "What you're doing here, it's not martial arts. It's emotional architecture." Sophie smiled. That's what Grandpa called it, too. But far from Portland, across the ocean, others were watching as well. In Kyoto, deep inside the temple's record hall, a council gathered. The Circle of Quiet Hands had not accepted a new member in over 3 decades. But Sophie's return had changed something. New applications for entry were arriving from places the temple had long forgotten. Cairo, Nairobi, Chicago, Kathmandu. "She has awakened the sleeping ones," the elder with the silver braids said. The girl with the red sneakers has become the voice they needed. One monk handed her a sealed scroll. "What is this?" she asked. Her first mission. Back in Portland, Sophie received the scroll 2 days later via a courier with no name. Inside it read, "The balance has tilted in New York. A school in the Bronx has fallen into chaos. The teachers are exhausted. The children are angry. One of them has started a fight club underground. You must go. You must listen. You are not there to end it. You are there to understand it." Laura looked up from the couch, concerned. "You're just a kid, Sophie." Sophie folded the scroll and nodded. "So are they." She packed only what she needed: the journal, her robe, and her red sneakers, freshly cleaned but a little worn at the edges. Before leaving, she wrote one more line in her journal. "Legacy isn't about what we leave behind. It's about who we walk beside before they fall." New York awaited, not with silence, but with sirens. Not with peace, but with pain. And Sophie was ready. Into the Bronx. The plane descended into New York City just after dusk. From the window, Sophie could see the endless grid of lights stretching across the horizon like a breathing machine. Restless, alive, loud. At baggage claim, a woman in her early 40s stood holding a sign that read, "Miss Caldwell, Quiet Hands Program." Agent Lena Ross. She introduced herself, flashing a badge. Not police, not FBI, but something else entirely. "I'm your liaison. You'll be staying with me in the South Bronx. You have 5 days." Sophie simply nodded. The next morning, they walked into Jefferson Middle School, a concrete building with faded murals and boarded-up windows. Inside, chaos. A teacher stormed out of a classroom, tears in her eyes. 2 boys were being dragged apart by a gym coach, while others cheered and recorded on their phones. Lockers banged. Security guards yelled. "Every day's a war," Lena muttered. "Principal wants to quit. The district wants to shut it down." Sophie didn't respond. She was watching. At the end of the hallway, near the stairwell, stood a boy. Still, watching everything with cold eyes. He didn't move when the fight broke out. Didn't flinch. Just watched.